Hello friends, welcome back to our current design pattern discussion. Today's topic is proxy design pattern. Last time we spoke about the singleton pattern and we have understood the concepts, the purpose, what to use, so many things, and we have discussed both in ABAP as well as JavaScript programming language. So if you haven't checked that video yet, definitely you can click on the I button or you can check the description box where I have given the tutorial link. I would definitely recommend you to check that video first because that is the simplest one to start with this design pattern concepts. Now, heading back to our current topic, which is the proxy pattern, uh, I believe to start with, we should ask ourselves what is a proxy. And I think no other example can better explain with a parent and child kind of things, where a child will make a request with a parent to get their toys, and the child don't go to shop directly to buy the toys, of course. Now the parents role is to validate if the request is the toys are good for their kid, the price, the age level, everything they validate, and if it suits well, then they buy the product or maybe buy the toys for their kid. So this is a real world example, and in this case the parent is playing a role of a proxy. Now, in the software design, same concepts we can extend, we can implement. To start with, I'll explain with a client and server architecture. And you see a simplest model where client will make a request to a server and server will send back the response. Send back the data as a response. Now, in this case, obviously, before you allow client to fetch data from, I believe you would like to validate certain things first, like whether this client is really authorized to make a call. If the client request contains all the valid information through which you can make a call, and so on and so forth. Kind of a different validations you can put before you really make a call to this API, because it's costly, it's a network calls, and to have those checkpoints, you would like to have one middleman. In this case we call it as a proxy, where we'll implement those kind of methods, such as validation, authorization checks, additional cache features, and so on. Now, client then don't have a visibility of this server API. Instead of the server, they will communicate with this proxy. And proxy will validate those, and everything looks okay. Then proxy will call the actual backend API and to get the data back for their client. And of course, you could ask a question like, why we need a proxy? Because it's unnecessarily making things complicated. Can't we put everything in this server API instead of adding a more extra more layer? Yes, technically you can do that, but doing this, what will happen? We are not encouraging or thinking about a decoupled way of development. Putting everything in one API will make this API more bulkier, and maybe it will be creating a problem during maintenance, because this API has been built only to make certain query to a database, maybe to update database, delete certain records from the database. So obviously those additional checkpoints nothing to do uh, from a functional perspective for this API. Keeping those extra methods means in future, if you would like to add one more features in this list, obviously you need to make a change to this API. So if you would like to keep them separated, so it will be easy to maintain in future, we can just change this proxy and our API or main server service will remain untouched. So this is the reason we should prefer to add one extra layer, and the client will communicate with this proxy, and there will be an interface where we'll declare our methods which will be shared between these two classes by implementing the same interface. We'll check all those things in a coding, both in ABAP and JavaScript. So stay tuned. So I'll use the ABAP transpiler to write my ABAP code, kind of a workaround for not having the ABAP system. You can follow along and just use the same code in your ABAP environment. It will work pretty well from there. So let's start with an interface creation. So this is my the method get data, which will take country name, not country name, put country ID as string, and it will return the country name. So let's create our backend server. Means we're going to create this particular class. Of course, I'm not going to create the actual server here, try to mimic the concept, but here you can see that I need to implement this interface. So let's do that. Syntax is interfaces, and this is the name of our interface. Copy and paste it. Now let's implement the method that we created over here, that is get data. To do that, we have to use the same interface name, tau sign, followed by the method name. Cool. So this server will just simply use a case statement, and I have an access now to this particular importing parameter. I'll just use the country ID, and I'll just make sure that export parameter have the value called India. Let's copy one more for Germany. Cool. Now this backend server will just take country ID and it will return the country name. As a practice, we should clear this variable before we use this particular export parameter. Now let's do something, our proxy class. The same way, proxy class needs to be implementing the same interface. So let's do that. The same interface for the proxy class. Obviously, the same method now we can copy. Fine, the method is now copied. So we can write certain validation now. We can write like the same country ID we can access from in this method as well. So we are writing like if this is initial, then of course we can do some more complicated logic, but I'm writing simple return from this method. You can write some logic, something like, some auth check you can perform as well. I'll not do it from here, but you can do, of course. Lastly, we want to call the method of our server from this proxy. Now to call this method, we need an object reference. Let's declare it first. O server reference. Type ref2 would be the same interface name. Make sure we are not giving the name of the class, but the interface wise we'll just declare it. And then we'll just use create object. We'll use the same object reference we just declared, but now we have to give the type of the class where this interface is implemented. So we can, from the proxy class, we are going to call the server. So we'll give the type as the server over here. Good. Now once we have the server, means we can call the method. Simple. Means we can use this object instance followed by get data method. Obviously now we need to provide some exporting parameter, which is this one, because we have to pass the country ID which this proxy class will get from. So that means proxy class get data will have the same parameters using the same thing, and importing basically this one from this server API, the country name, and obviously I'll put the same variable over here. I hope it's clear to you. It's pretty simple. Exporting the country ID and getting the country name from the actual server. provided this validation is successful. Now our particular thing is particular proxy class we have created. So let's do something our mains client creation. So now we'll do our client creation. We'll write client. Now this client needs to call this particular proxy class. So let's declare a data variable called object proxy and type ref to same interface, because the proxy class also has implemented this interface, so through which we can call now proxy class. Let's see how to do it. So the method we have to declare. So let's declare a method, and we can do something little bit easier. We can use a class methods, so we don't need to create any object instance of the client. Give the name called run. Okay, now we can declare this method, implement this method as run. From here we are going to call this proxy class. So that means we can declare proxy reference type ref to LCL proxy. Once I do this, we can now create an object, create object with this object reference. Type should be now the proxy class, of course. I did a wrong thing. I have to use the interface ID which I've been doing, not the actual class name. And when I'll create the object, then I'll give the actual class name proxy. So once I have this one, now I can call the method, and the same method get data. And now I can write the same code. Let's say copy this enter code. Only thing, we need to change this reference now, and I don't have a country ID and all. So what I can do, we can remove the country ID, we can put IN, and we'll get the country name over here, and obviously don't have this declared, so let's declare the country name also. And we can use this one very well over here. And once we get that name, we can print it also. Done. So now let's and now we can just call the class name client followed by the method name, which is run. That's it. And we'll get India. So if we just want to run one more time with a different value, we can do that. We can put DE and we'll get Germany. And if we don't put anything and kind of a space, then we will not see anything, any values. We're getting Germany because country name is not getting cleared. So we need to clear this country name. So after we get this, clear the country name, and then again copy it, put it here, and now you see if we don't pass the country ID, we don't get the country name. So that's what the proxy is all about, that we can implement in ABAP programming language. I hope you have enjoyed this one, and let's now move over to the JavaScript part. Now for JavaScript, we'll use certain object creation techniques that we have learned in our last tutorial in the Singleton Pattern episode. So as we know, JavaScript doesn't have any class as such, unlike ABAP or Java. yeah, the syntax are there, but it's kind of a syntactical sugar that you can think through. So we'll just use the function object. So let's first create our server. So the concept is like function, um, and I'll just give the function name as server. Now object creation means it will return some global object, and I will use a name of the method, which is because as we don't have the class as well as interface, so we'll use this signature called get data, just like we did in the ABAP environment. Same function. So obviously we don't need any name now because the name itself is get data. Parameters we can put country ID, similar way we did last time, and we can use a switch function, and we can just check this country ID, and if country ID is IN, we'll just return let's say India, and we can copy the same, put it here. Now try for Germany, same example, and if anything default, we'll just put default as invalid country ID. Let's say this is what we are going to put the logic for our server. So now let's create our proxy class. So similar like we will create a proxy, and now for the proxy also we need to have the same kind of a signature. So let's open an object and we put get data function. Now this get data will also need the same input as country ID. Let's do a little validation. We'll write first, and we'll say like if country ID is initial, means I kind of a space, right? Or maybe undefined or something like empty, will simply return country ID is mandatory. Let's say this is what we are going to validate. So after validation, let's call the object of our server class. So how to do that? So what we'll do, we'll just simply call our server. So this is our server is the function, so we can put server. Now once I call this server, so obviously this server is exposing this object get data. So that means we can avail this function get data, and we'll just put the country ID as an input parameter. Let's make it a variable late. So now I have this server that I'm going to, I think it's the country name. There should be a better variable declaration, because if I pass the country ID, I'll expect the country name from this server response, and that I'll just return from this country name. Cool. So my proxy class is defined, and now I can do a little bit on my last one, which is our client. So constant client, and this client I'm calling as an if, something like I'll declare a function under a wrapper, and what I'll do, I'll just call this proxy class first. So let So eventually after calling a proxy server, we'll get the name only. So we again put country name, we'll call proxy. So once we call proxy, we'll avail this get data from proxy class. So let's get that and put a country ID, let's IN. So what will happen, we'll get this country name out of this proxy class, and we can just do a console log of country name. So let's quickly test it. So let's test once, and voila, it's working. If I put India to my proxy object and call this function, passing the country code, which eventually calls the server, and it gets back the country name. It's getting printed. So if I call once more the same thing, and this time I am not going to redeclare the variable, but I would prefer to put something, let's say Germany, DE. What will happen? I'm getting Germany as the outcome. That's great. Let's do one more time. This time put France. What I'm going to expect? Invalid country ID, right? Because this is what we put in the default. If something not India or Germany, fine. Next, I'll put something without any country code, and if I run, let's see, it says country ID is mandatory. So now what I need to implement other than this, so this validation, let's do a little bit of the cache feature that we have seen last time. So this cache feature, we need to implement now. So for that, we need a global kind of an array, and it's a country cache. Okay, a global array. So next would be, the moment I get that country, let's create an object, calling it country object, and this object I want to build that as ID with country ID and name as country name. Once we build this object, let's put country cache. I think this is the array dot push. We can put this object name so that we are just keeping the response in an array. Cool. So that means we can now check this array before we make a call to this API. So we're just putting something, a console log for our convenience to check calling API. So at this moment, what will happen if I run? I can see before every country fetch, we are calling API, right? Before getting the data, each time we're calling an API. But now we have to make sure that if we already fetch the data, we don't need to call this. So what we'll do, if we see this validation is successful, they will check the cache. So for that, we'll use country cache dot filter call an arrow function, and we'll put the object. So it will look through this array for each object, and here we'll just validate if object ID. So this is we learned in our last singleton how to create the different access the different properties. So this is currently we are using now. This is equal to this country ID. If this object matches, then what we'll do, we'll just return this corresponding object but this time it will be name. And overall this return will basically try to give the data, match data into an array. So let's declare something called country name. I can put this way, and this is equal to country cache. So what will happen? This becomes an array, and wherever there is a match, that value will be available in this particular array, within this array. So let's check that array. Before we make a call. So we'll just, what we'll do, if this country, I think country name, right? So this country name dot length greater than 0 means something we have collected. Then what we'll do, return, we'll just return country name as an array 0 dot name. So this is what we just want out of this. And then we don't going to call this API. So now what will happen if I call the same country, let's say Germany again we want to call, and let's see what happens. You see, country ID is mandatory, which was also got the last time, but now Germany is getting called. The data is actually fetching from the cache, and no more the API call is getting printed. So let's do one more for the country India. See what happens. Of course, same thing will happen. India will be printed, and this time no API is getting called. So that is the cache feature, something a very simplest way I tried to explain. I believe you understood. Like once the data is being fetched, I'm trying to keep it in a cache. And before I make a call to this API, this is not definitely not an API, just a mimic of the server. So we are just getting that name out of the cache and don't need to make another network call unnecessarily. I hope this session was useful to you. Share your feedback. Thanks for watching and goodbye. We'll meet again with the next pattern.